Welcome to the Be Better broadcast, where we come at you to give you strategies and tips and techniques and philosophies to help you to live a better life, both personally, but also professionally. And today we're really going to dial in on the professional elements of being better, especially in the form of leadership. We talk about leadership a lot on this show. And the reason we do so is because we're all leaders in some area of our life. Some of us are leaders inside of our company or organization, which we're really going to dial in today with our guest, Dr. Troy. But some of us are leaders in our family. Some of us are leaders in our community. And the principles that we talk about today, while many of them will be centered on business and professionalism, they will also apply to every single area of your life at the same time. I'm really excited to talk to our guest today because he's established in the business world. He's established in the leadership community. He's written several incredible books on leadership. His name is Dr. Troy Hall. And for those who don't know Dr. Troy, he has been featured on the Today Show, ABC, Beyond the Business Radio Show, and CEO World. Dr. Troy Hall is an award-winning culture strategist, speaker, best-selling author, and talent retention expert. And we're going to be talking all about those things. His doctorate in global leadership and entrepreneurship has sent him across the globe to help leaders create cultures of cohesion and retain top talent in their organizations. He's the best-selling author of the titles Cohesion Culture, Proven Principles to Retain Your Top Talent, and the #1 title for business and professional humor, FANNY Rules, a mother's leadership lessons that never grow old. He was once told he did not have the talent to write. His mom, Fanny, reminded him, it's not the successes or the failures that shape your life. It's how you handle them. Dr. Troy, it is a pleasure to have you here, my friend.
Well, thank you, Brandon. It's good for me to be here. And I will tell you that if I were any better, I'd be you.
Well, thank you very much. I've been told that we are best friends at this point, and I'm excited to know you because I know that you're only going to continue to grow. I know that you're only going to continue to reach more people with what you do. So I love catching people at this point in their journey. I mean, you've been in this for over 40 years now, but just seeing how you continue to grow after here will be important. My first question for you, and I hope I'm not overstepping immediately, but when did you graduate college?
Okay, well, that's sort of like talking to a woman and asking her age. I mean, so there's two topics, don't you know? There's two topics. You never talk age, you never talk weight.
Well, let me tell you why I asked that question.
Ask me how much I can bench. Now we're into a conversation. I want to be real clear about that. So let me just say this, because I think this is important for people to think about their education. And sometimes people think that's a perfect scenario for how you become educated, that you graduate high school and then you go immediately into college and then you do this and you do that. My journey has extended over the last 44 years. So various points in time, it really just all became, what did I want to do? And how did I see this benefiting, what I was doing or benefiting others? Because I do really care about other people and how my choices might impact someone else. And so a decision that I made early on in life was to get married right after high school. So I've been married to my high school sweetheart since 1977.
Wow.
And so for people who have been struggling to get their bachelor's degree or some sort of, technical schools, because everyone doesn't have to go to college, right? You can have technical, but I actually graduated in 1988 from college, but it was 13 years in the making. Wow. And some of that is because when I was younger, I thought I knew everything, even though my mom had done a great job teaching me that it would be better for me to be a Mr. Learn-It-All than a Mr. Know-It-All. But I somehow found myself being successful in business without a degree, but that only lasted so long. And when I recognized that I was going to be held back because I did not have the degree, I buckled under and in 2 years finished what it took me 13 years to actually do.
That is incredible. Let me tell you the reason I ask. I ask because you have a degree in entrepreneurship. And I know that in 1988, entrepreneurship was a very different thing, at least the stigma of entrepreneurship, than it is now. Like now, every day, everyone's title is entrepreneur, right? So back in the day, what did it mean to be an entrepreneur and how did you find yourself on that specific path?
Well, realistically, what caught my attention in the very beginning was business management, business leadership. And so that was really my focus. And it wasn't so much the individual entrepreneur, the mom and pop. And so what really happened some, 20, 30 years ago, it was more of an enterprise. So entrepreneurship was kind of like, oh, that's what you do just when you want to have something on the side. But now come full circle here, 30 or 40 years, there are more small businesses open today keeping America up and running than the larger companies. And it's that fiber of the entrepreneur, the individual who says, I want to make something. I want to have autonomy. I want to, work in a collaborative environment, but at my own pace. I want to know that what I have is meaningful work and it's purposeful for what I do. And I really, want to explore that. So to give you a case in point, my daughter, she at first started out being a police officer, and we always felt that that was the right thing for her to do. My wife and I, we talked about it because she was always an authority waiting to happen. And she's not going to hear this, so I know I'll be okay on what I say. So she went in, she was a police officer. But what she then found was that as she transitioned into a relationship and start a family, that wasn't the right career for her, and she needed to figure out something else. So she had a love for baking. Baking was big in our family. And so, I had immigrant grandparents who came from over in Austria and Italy and Yugoslavia and in those areas. So baking was a big deal. So we had a lot of baking in our family. So she transitioned from being a police officer to being a baker. Wow. And she built her entire business on social media.
Wow, good for her. When did she begin this journey?
Yeah, and 30 years ago, you see, entrepreneurs would have had to have their shop open. So their barrier to entry was so much greater 30 some years ago than what it is today. Today, we have a very different barrier to entry. We have now TikTok, we have influencers, we have individuals who can now reach large audiences by simply being on their computers and doing a show like what we're doing today. And who would have ever thought about broadcasting live? I mean, you'd have to be a major studio to broadcast live. But now we're broadcasting live here. We've got LinkedIn Live. We've got Amazon Live. There's all these opportunities for us today. And that's why that field of entrepreneurship today is really more crowded. But if you're the right entrepreneur, then you're really getting into it for the niche that you have or the niche that you have in your area. And that's what that entrepreneur will do.
Well said. Yeah, well said. And congrats on all of her success too, moving from being in law enforcement to opening her own business and baking. That's an awesome story in itself. And I agree completely. The barrier of entry now is very, very different than it used to be. I was never around when it was that old way. All I know is this new world. I'm 27. So I by the time I was 15, I had a high powered machine in my pocket. Right. And,
yes.
I think that because we were talking about true or real entrepreneurs, really what that means is there's a problem and you're going out to solve it, right? And I think with all these mediums of communication that we have with live broadcasts and social media, your voice is so powerful that it becomes so important to be very intentional about the words that we're saying and the message that we're sending. And the question that I would ask everyone to ponder is, what is the value or unique message that I do bring to the marketplace to solve a specific problem that I have experience or even passion behind to make a difference? So obviously for you, that was leadership years ago, right? And you've been in this industry for a long time. You've seen patterns and trends. And I'm curious, after all this time of working with giant corporations globally, worldwide, what are people in businesses, what are they bringing you in for to help them with now?
Well, interesting that you say that. So for individuals who are listening and wanting to really hone in on their craft, you want to choose your voice of authority. And you want to know, what do you want to be known for? So one of the lessons I learned when doing my PhD was from my dissertation chair. And he said, whatever you do for your dissertation is what you'll be known for. He said, so choose wisely. He said, you're not going to solve world peace and you're not going to cure a disease through your dissertation. But what the emphasis is will make a difference. And it really also, that translated then further into why I chose group dynamics and why I did Cohesion, because I work with people, I work with teams. I like this. I like that community, camaraderie, the collaboration, all of that working together. And it just seemed to make sense that in leadership, further organizational leadership and working inside organizations, there's a lot of team and group work that was done. So that made sense for me, so that I would be able to say I am an authority. By the way, I want to be clear. I am an authority, an article, not the authority, which is very different. So a lot of individuals can be an authority, but you're not necessarily the authority. So with that being said, when I moved into doing more of the consulting and the executive coaching work, and that's how Cohesion Culture, that's how the book got really birthed, was from the concept of saying, well, now what I know, leadership and doing practical leadership is great, but what makes my voice different than someone else who's offering leadership? What can, how can it be different? Now, the one thing I do is I do a lot of metaphorical trainings and metaphorical speaking, because when people can relate to something else, then it makes a lot of sense, and they can go, oh, I get the concept, and it helps them with complex concepts. But that's still not enough. So what I saw in the marketplace is that, because I really like working with organizations and people and teams, I saw that companies spent a lot of money acquiring people into their organization, but they didn't care about retaining them. They thought they cared about it, but they didn't. What programs did they have to retain? Did they really look at the talent before it left the door? They might have a process that says, oh, well, let's interview and do an exit interview and we'll find out things. But how much of those things that you found out did you really change or make a difference? So Cohesion Culture gave me an opportunity now to go into organizations and help them actually retain their talent. So a cohesion culture is a safe workspace where people have a sense of belonging, are valued, and share in mutual commitment. The thing about cohesion is that it's a causal phenomenon. It's not correlational. Now, in business, we all make correlational decisions every day. And sometimes we try to take that information and we try to predict what will happen. Well, if we really understand the difference between correlational and causal, then we would understand that in correlational data, all we're doing is providing a high statistical probability that there is a relationship between two or more items, or there is no relationship. One does not cause the other. What intrigued me about cohesion is that cohesion causes. It's a cause and effect. You have cohesion in your organization, no matter whether you're a small entrepreneur, mom and pop shop, or whether you're a very large organization. When cohesion is present, you get performance. The level of performance you get is engagement. It's the excited individual, the loyal employee, the person who will go the extra mile, who will help other people, who will first think of others first and then self. And if you balance all of that with 7 attributes of an effective leader, with the 4 transformative principles that I speak to, then now all of a sudden you've got this formula that says, oh, I now know what I can do. And I can give people this really hard evidence and this hard information to make a compelling conversation to go, well, I just need to focus on cohesion. If I want my business to be successful, I just have to be singularly focused on cohesion. So that is how, that particular topic came to be and how I've transitioned. But it was all about finding my voice and what did I want my voice to be? Just no different than if I were, because I guess I do offer a product or service, but it's any product and service, what is it that you want to do, and do that thing very well. And don't try to be everything to everyone, but do the one thing that you do really well. And if you pick up some other things along the way to expand your product line, then that's a great idea. You can do that. And I could probably talk about some of the companies that have failed where they were really good at one thing. They brought in some other stuff. They totally failed, had to go back to their old formula again. So I do know that this process works really well.
Yeah, and that's really fascinating because I come from the world of sales and I'm constantly working with sales companies, and they seldom are asking, well, how can we be sure that we're keeping our people longer? It's always, well, how can we make more money? How can we get the most out of the people we have? How can we hire people, especially right now in today's world? But the question is never, except for one time, I actually did hear someone say, well, how can we keep them longer? What can we do in order to make them happier while being here? And it was such a foreign concept that they looked up books to buy, and there was like 2 books on the market. And I don't know if yours was one of those books. And now I do know that it is. And that's a beautiful thing. But let me tell you this. the turnover in a lot of sales companies, as you know, is almost 40% or higher, right? Especially these 100% commission environments. And I am a big believer that there's always one thing that we can focus on that's going to garner us the most results possible. So when you go into an organization, one that has recognized, okay, we want to keep our people, not want to, we need to, right? It's the great resignation. They're all going to different companies to work virtually, to be more appreciated, whatever it might be. What is generally the first thing that you'll focus on when you start working with a business? Let's start there. What's one of the first things you'll start working on in order to create this culture of cohesion?
So let me get there, but I want to do one thing first, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I want to do a little exercise with you because I want to really hone in on the difference between this correlational data and causal.
Okay.
Okay. So play along with me. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So Brandon, you've experienced a rainy day, right?
Oh, all the time. Yeah.
Okay. And when you have that rainy day, do you open an umbrella?
My wife does, but I just choose to get wet.
You choose to get wet. Okay. Have you gone to the beach?
Oh, yeah.
And do you see umbrellas open on the beach?
Oh, 100%.
And when those umbrellas are opened, does it rain?
No, not always.
No, right. So that's correlational. I can make a strong correlation between rainy days and umbrellas, that rainy days will cause umbrellas to open. But umbrellas opening do not cause rainy days. And rainy days alone do not cause umbrellas to open. But when we talk about cohesion, you get performance. If you have performance in your organization, it has to be from cohesion. The research proves it time and time again. And getting that level of performance is the engagement that organizations want. That's why I wanted to really hone in on that. And I got a little sidetracked before. And I thought, well, let's go back and clean that up so that we know the difference between what causal means and correlational. Now, does that mean to those individuals who are watching or listening that you should not use correlational data to make some decisions? No, but just understand that if you want a better predictor of future, you need to find a causal phenomenon that will allow that to happen. And cohesion happens to be one of them. And that's why it gets so much attention when I talk to organizations, because all of a sudden that example, remember I told you I was metaphorical, speaker, trainer, teacher?
Yeah.
Well, guess what? All of a sudden we become very clear in that. We go like, oh my gosh, I understand what you're talking about now. So, and why do even organizations want to care about it? Is because $7 trillion annually is spent on organizations that do not operate cohesively. So if they don't have cohesion in their teams, globally, we're losing about $7 trillion a year on it. One thing we know for sure is that when we don't retain talent, the cost to the organization is 50% of the person's salary. That's from the latest SHRM information. And so you think that if you have a $60,000 salary, you're spending $30,000 to replace that person. And you may not see it in really hard dollars. It's more maybe opportunity dollars, but it does come on the balance sheet again, because not only are you recruiting and you're doing the retraining, imagine the organizational intelligence that walks out the door. And that is very difficult to put an exact price on. These are the people who know how your systems work. They know who to call when there's a problem. They understand how the policies and procedures work within the organization. They understand vendor management. They understand marketing. They understand HR. They've got all this understanding, and they're actually taking it with them and they're leaving. So the real opportunity here is to try to retain them. So now we'll get to your question. Your question was, well, what do I do when I first go into an organization? So the first thing I do is I establish whether the CEO is on board and retaining talent or not. Because if the CEO is not on board, that doesn't matter what I do after that, it's a mess. Because the CEO can make or break the program. They can do it in the simplest of statements, the simplest of things that they may say, even a little off comment joke that they may make can totally derail an entire program. So I need to make sure that the CEO is on board. When I know the CEO is on board, I don't have to work with the CEO. I just got to know that the CEO is on board and we've got an understanding of what we're going to do.
Dr. Troy, let me interrupt you real quick.
Yeah, sure.
What happens if the CEO is not on board, and what percentage have you found where the CEO isn't on board with this plan that you roll out?
Well, what I would do is I turn around and go somewhere else. So I'm not going to spend my time, because the reality is that my brand is based on the success that I have in being able to help organizations see a return in saving their employees or retaining their employees. So I know that the single most barrier to making that happen will be the CEO, because the CEO can enact policies, changes, really lead and direct the organization in that positive way that we want to see happen. It also, the CEO sets the real temperature for what happens in the company. People will follow. And you can have a CEO that is very charismatic, and individuals will be, really great to follow, and things will work out good. You can have an individual who might be very stern, not be so charismatic, but people will still respect this individual and follow them. So it's really not personality, it's more of their mindset. And do they believe this? They fundamentally believe that retaining talent is important, because if you're not willing to put in some of the work that needs to happen, then you're just simply doing what Einstein said, and that is you're doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, when in fact you just end up with insanity. So,
Yeah.
So with that, so the percentage of, so for me, the people I work with, it's 100%. Now, have I run across individuals? Yes. But I'm really such a small person that I don't know that my percentage and speaking that percentage is going to make that much difference to your listening audience.
Sure.
The real point is not how many people don't get on it, but how many people get off it. And so will that leader actually be on the program? Will they get off of their own like, I don't care, I just worry about profits? And if they really do focus a little bit on people, then it will change. So what I do then is, when I go into organizations, the first thing I have them do is an observation. Social learning is the concept of our observations and coming in interaction with something. We then have an opportunity to imitate that information. We're then judging it and assessing it and evaluating it, and then we'll implement it if we like it. So what I want folks to do first is to go out and observe. And I ask them to observe three things. One is observe the greetings that occur within your organization. Who's actually talking to each other, and what are they saying? Is a senior leadership speak to people in the hallway? Are they reserved? Do you have access to the senior leadership? Or is it an organization where the only person is your immediate supervisor, and the other person you've never even heard of, aside from their name, or maybe their name signs the check? So we want to talk about that and understand, how do people interact? So they've got these greetings, this sort of formal and informal communication. The next thing you listen for is laughter. Now, it's not the har, 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 slap my knee, isn't that funny? It's the lightheartedness that is within the organization. You want to listen for, is there some form of stress relief that happens, that individuals feel more calm in their interactions with each other, or people scurrying around all the time, running around telling everyone how busy they are, and try to use busyness as their badge of honor. So you really want to see that, how that actually is happening. And when I start to tell you about these things and what to look for, all of a sudden you can pinpoint and look in on them. And then the last thing is that, can you experience camaraderie? Do you experience affirmations? Do people actually give high fives, handshakes, fist bumps, whether physical or virtual, whatever it is? Do they compliment each other for the work that's done? Are they not afraid to give credit to someone else because they're worried about themselves? I mean, there's all these types of things that really make a difference inside the organization. And I tell people, don't do anything with this information, but jot it down. And let's come back and talk about it, because I don't want people to become the greeting, laughter, and camaraderie police. I don't want them going out to people and going, you're not greeting me today, shame on you. We don't want that. What we want is for them to have an understanding. Then the second thing that we do is, then we do a assessment. I do a cultural assessment. And so it's a survey that we can take and within the organization, and we can break down that survey into a number of categories, and we provide a unique URL for each group that is going to take the survey. So they take the same survey, but what that does is that allows me to determine frontline from support, leadership from non-leadership in each of those 4 areas. And we specifically recommend just those 4 areas. I can then do some analysis on, what does the front office say from the back office or, front line from the support areas. I can also say the difference between leadership in this area versus non-leadership and what their assessment of the culture is. And then we can use that information to kind of get a benchmark as to where we are. Then within the HR group, we take the strategic framework of cohesion, which is belonging, value, and shared mutual commitment, lay it over top of the organization, and then say, well, what are we doing in these areas? And what are the things? So we have another little worksheet that we do for each of them. And we say, it's the same worksheet, but for each focus for belonging, what do we need to increase? What do we need to decrease? What do we need to create? What do we need to eliminate? So it's a little grid sheet, and we kind of go through that exercise to figure out what those things are. Then once we have those sheets completed, we then say, okay, well, what's reasonable to now complete? And what do you already have on your shelf that may support something that's already in this area? So I don't go in selling a bunch of additional products and services. I don't go in doing the work. I go in advising the team how to do the work. And the reason that I use that approach is because when you own it, when you live it, breathe it, and own it, then you are more likely to keep up with it than if you simply had delegated it to me to come in and try to be the savior to fix it. And then when I'm gone, then everything falls apart because you weren't involved in the process. So I work very intimately with these organizations and organizational leaders to ensure that they're doing the things that they need to do. It also allows me to have scale. Right? If I were in an organization doing all the work, I would have no scale. I would have to stay in one company for a long period of time. But this way, I can advise a number of companies in what they're doing and can get them started. So my engagements work from just hourly to actual projects. Just depends on what happens. But that should give you a good flavor of it. And the good news about the benchmarking is a year later, we can redo this assessment. We have a way to control the assessment so that we're getting the information from individuals who have been there for that year, so they're the ones being impacted by it because they knew what happened before. All your new people who come in the current year are separated and then become a new benchmark because they weren't subject to the old stuff. But what we want to know is the people who were subject to the old stuff, who are seeing the new stuff, how are you thinking now? And do you see a change? And did we create the incremental change that we had targeted for? And so that's the way I'm able to work with organizations and create scale in what I do. And I know your entrepreneurs would love the fact to be able to create scale.
That's amazing. I'm just geeking out over that system because it's an incredible system that's replicatable in many different industries. But I think there's several key points I want to make here. The first key point is I want to acknowledge you for living and breathing your message. And when I say that, I mean you exude cohesion. As I never thought I would say those words together, but you do. You create. You have a vibration of safety and lightheartedness and laughter. And I can only imagine how much that helps in itself when you go into these businesses, especially, the all suited up, the corporate world, and they have someone with your vibration come in. It's like a culture shock to a lot of organizations, especially the old style organizations. So I commend you for your own way that you go about things.
Well, thank you for saying that. So I've just been affirmed today, and this is wonderful. How
absolutely. I'm sure living in a. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, and back to you, because you created this environment. You didn't even know it, but you made me feel so welcome in some of the communications we had prior to being on the show today. The care that you took to make sure that I was ready and prepared and knew what was going to happen. And then our pre-talk that we had before we went on. I mean, all of that was helping me feel like I had a sense of belonging. It wasn't just that I was an object, but that I was more of a partner with you in the way this conversation would happen today. And then you created value in how you had really how you've talked about me and some of the things that I'm able to do. And that just was really wonderful. And then, of course, the last part of it was, the shared mutual commitment that we are partnering today to provide really strong information to your listeners. Like the last thing I want to do is to get onto a show and talk about things only to hear myself speak. I want to make a difference. So my goal in all of this, much like yours, is to know that our job in leadership is to motivate, influence, and enable others to achieve things that they never thought were possible, to help them be successful. And if we focus it in that way, we'll do great. I'll just offer this in leadership for two things. And this is lessons that my mom has taught me. Here's two simple things. Number one, the choices and decisions you make, ask yourself, are you causing harm to yourself or to others? If you're causing harm to yourself or others, then don't do it. So that's one easy way that you can think about the choices that you want to make in life and what those choices will mean. And then, and then realistically, the rest then just comes in, how do you treat people? How do you want them to treat you, and how do you treat them? And so you must first invest in them and then let them be able to invest in you. And that's why really the success in transformative leadership is having the leader invest in others first and then self. And I kind of use a door as an example, entering into a door to kind of make my point. So Brandon, again, with your permission, I'm going to use you for another example. So you're up? Okay, yeah. You're up for this. All right. So if you're with a group of 3 or 4 people and the door opens outward towards you, then you will find that someone will take the position of the door, right? And holding the door. Right. So would you typically be that person? Sometimes are you that person who holds the door for others?
Especially if I open the door, then yes.
Yeah. You open the door, and then what happens?
Everyone walks through and you follow last.
And then you follow them, right? So you entered into the building as well.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So that's an example of putting others first and then taking care of self. So you need to make sure that leaders understand it's not martyrism. You're not martyring yourself. You're not sacrificing everything for your business. You're sacrificing for your business first and then self. Because if you don't take care of yourself, then it's not going to make a difference. When I do executive coaching, I remind people of this message. You cannot serve the many until you serve the one. And now let's break that down.
Wow.
You cannot serve other people if you, the leader, are not taken care of. If you don't, just like on an airplane, why do they tell you to put your mask on first? Because you're of no help to anyone else if you're not breathing. So you have to prepare yourself as a leader. That means you've got to make sure you know what's going in your mind. You've got to know who are the people around you who are going to positively influence you. You have to know what actions you take, and you need to be responsible for all those actions. Part of that is having self-regard, meaning that you know the actions you're going to take before you take them. And so therefore you're in a position not to have to apologize for doing something crazy. And so all of this will contribute to this concept of this transformative leadership and serving the one to serve the many. Because when you're working in an organization, you may be leading a group of them, but you must think of the thems as individual hims and hers. So are you prepared to lead the him and the her? And you must work with them individually as well as collectively. Oftentimes leaders sometimes only do group meetings. They just bring everybody together and talk to the whole group. But you really will make the differences when you start to localize it and work with the individual. Another element of that has to do with if you're into community service work. You cannot help the plight of many if you haven't handled the humanness of the one. You must see the humanity of the individual. That speaks very, greatly to our conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion today, which is extremely important. But can you see the humanness in the one? Because to break the cycle of helplessness, you need hope. And you create hope one person at a time. And you do it by helping to aspire and teach vision that comes from this transformative principle. And with your permission, I'd like to share a little story with you to dramatize this helping the one that makes a difference for the many.
Yes, please. I love the philosophical twist this is taking. Please. Yeah.
So in that conversation, I had an opportunity to work in Kenya. I had a couple of field engagements when I was there. And during one of my experiences, I was working with leaders within the village. And part of it was to help them with things like savings, mobilization, and credit utilization, more from the financial perspective, but also understanding the social plights and the things that were happening. So I met these 3 men. And this particular village was a very small village, but it was filled with crime. It was filled with prostitution, issues with drugs, poor economic conditions, and poor living conditions, education. Those men were rescued by a mentor, someone who said that they wanted to invest, they wanted to do something good for someone. They found these 3 men, they educated them, And this men had a turning point. They had an opportunity. Now they were educated. They could have gone anywhere to have created, better paying jobs for themselves, a better life for their family. But they chose to go back to their village to make a difference. And so I asked them, I said, so tell me, where did you find, or where did you think you'd make the biggest difference? And they said, well, we really feel that a lot of the crime in our village is a direct result of prostitution. And so we know that if we are going to make a change for people, that it's up to the individual to make the change. So instead of us trying to convert all prostitutes, what we will do is we'll focus on the ones who thought that they didn't have any other choice but this. The ones who chose it as a choice, they weren't going to listen, but they could make a difference for those who chose it because they thought they had nothing else to do. And I said, well, then what will you do? And they said, well, we're going to teach them a new craft. And I said, well, what would that be? And they said, we're going to teach them to sew. And I said, oh, that's really awesome. So, and why teaching them to sew? Because they'll make something, they'll be able to sell it in the market. It will create economy for them. They'll be selling something other than themselves and creating value. And they'll be able to have this trade that they can then rely on for many years to come. So now immediately, I've got my US hat going on. I'm in Western culture and I'm going, okay, we've got a warehouse. We've got sewing machines lined up. We've got brochures and social media we passed out. We got people lined up around the corner. We've got to have people directing them in so that they know where they are. We have to have teachers and trainers. Now, all that went into my head in a matter of seconds. Thank goodness it was contained inside my head. I then asked this question and said, well, how many sewing machines will you start with? And they said, one. Of course, I had a little puzzled look, because I had all that other stuff going on in my head. And I said, one. And they said, yes, we must change the mind of one to affect the mind of two.
Wow.
We will change the mind of two to affect the mind of 4 and 8 and 16 and 32. And you get the idea. So it really helped me understand when I say you cannot serve the many until you serve the one, you can begin to understand the philosophical concept that you must take care of the individual before you can think of the plight of the many. And in organizations, sometimes what happens, we get so far ahead of the game that we forgot to take care of where we were currently standing. So as we consider our future and where we're going, which is really awesome to have that, we must be grounded in where we are today so that we can have that opportunity to go forward. Because again, more philosophical messaging here is that you cannot be a victor of your future if you're held captive by your past. The only place to get to the future is from the present. You never get to the future from the past. The past is a frame of reference. It's something that you can look back to, but there's a reason why in a car, your windshield is many times larger than your rearview mirror. Because you should be spending more time looking forward and moving your direction forward. But you must respect where you are today, just like you respect the one before the many. So if you want to move into a future, then you can't rely on what you already know. You have to think about the things that you don't know, which is why my mantra is, you don't have to know everything. You just need to be teachable. Because if you've got that mindset, there's so many things that you can do. There's so much wonderful things that can happen because you are not so rigid and stuck in the feeling that you have to know it all or you have to do it all, and that you're so able to allow others to contribute and be a blessing to you in so many different ways.
Wow. I don't even know what to say. I feel like a future version of myself just like came into my world and said, this is what you need to know now. Super powerful, Dr. Troy. But
thank you.
Thanks for all your kind words too, before that incredible story that really personifies the importance of leading by example and being grounded where you are now. My follow-up to that, before I want to ask you about FANNY rules. I have a specific question on that I want to get to, but I have to ask you, how can one objectively self-evaluate where they are now? How can we be grounded in the now? Like, is there a specific question that we should ask ourselves, process? What's that look like?
Well, the one thing I would say, first of all, is what are you reading and listening to? What are you putting inside your mind? Are you being relevant? And are you listening to something more than just social media or social news? So where is your grounded truth? And what is that information? So I like to just make sure that you're really thinking of it in that way. The next thing is, are you collaborating with other people? Do you invite other people into your world? Do you share with them? Do you share with them to help you make choices and decisions? Do you only bring them in when you want to validate what you're doing? Do you do some combination of that? So that area of collaboration. So you really want to think about, what are you bringing into your mind? Are you collaborating with others? And then lastly, it's like, then what are the actions that you're taking? You know, what are you putting forward? You talked about leading by example. Well, it's very important. But even people doing things wrong lead by example.
True.
So again, it goes back to a fundamental concept of, what you lead by example, does it create harm to self or others? If it does, then stop doing it. And you don't need a whole bunch of other people to come and tell you. What tends to happen with leadership and why it gets so messed up is because they don't feel they're going to get caught even when they do something that they shouldn't be doing. And they already know they shouldn't be doing it. And so I have this concept that says, I like to give people grace. Grace is the unmerited favor that I can extend for no reason at all. I'm not expecting anything in return. I just extend grace to someone. But I also like to be cautious of people who apologize every time they get caught, because I really want the apology to come because the individual has remorse, not because someone told them that what they were doing was wrong and they now have been called out on it. There's now been a shout out to that person on what they're doing. So again, going back to it, it would be, what are you reading, listening to? What are you putting in your mind? How are you collaborating with others? Are others even asking you to collaborate? Those would be some of the things that can help you really be, really can be a good way for you to self-evaluate yourself and what you're doing. And then you can listen to the viewpoint of others. It really doesn't hurt for you to sometimes ask people openly, so tell me a little bit about how you feel about our relationship, and what have I done for you lately? Not so much what has they done for me, but what have I done for you? And really just see how all of that kind of shows up. And for the most part, we don't need a whole lot of training to do this. We just need to do it.
Yeah, we just need to be a human about it, right? Just
Right.
what can we do for other people? Because we know the law of reciprocity will bring it back to us. We don't do it to get something in return, but we do it to be of service. And really, that's, like you said, grace. That's why we're here. We have a mastermind meeting later today. I'm going to incorporate the whole grounded where you are as well as where you want to go. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate you going over each one of those things. Now, you've written two incredible books. You've got Cohesion Culture and you've got FANNY Rules, a mother's leadership lessons that never grow old.
Yeah, let me get that one up here for those, since we're live here. Let's go. FANNY Rules. Here we go.
I love that cover. Very nice. Yeah. I wanted to ask you, specifically with FANNY Rules, what was the most, I know you already gave us two lessons that your mother taught you, but what was the most valuable lesson that you personally took and think about and use to this day in your life that you got from her?
Well, let me just give you a little context to this, and then I think that will make sense with what I'm going to tell you. So
Okay.
for me, when I was 12 years old, my mom was diagnosed with cancer, breast cancer. We lived in a small rural town in West Virginia, poor economic conditions, limited education. We were about 30 to 45 minutes from any major medical facility. So that was devastation for us, because 50 some years ago, when a person was diagnosed with cancer, it was inevitable that they would die. Those were the odds. So we thought mom would die. But mom actually had this great conversation with us, and she said, here's the deal. She said, I was going to live before I found out that I had cancer. I'm going to continue until the good Lord takes me. So I will make the right choices and decisions along the way, but I'm going to choose life. And so what she did is she allowed me to understand this. And so she held off on the surgery until school ended so that I could take care of her and nurture her. My mom was the caregiver and nurturer. My dad was the protector and provider. Good relationship with both of them, but the book is about mom. And so during that time, months before, mom taught me how to cook, to clean, to shop, how to write a check, how to pay the bills, to do everything that she did. She spent all that time teaching me so that I would be prepared in the event that she would not survive. But it didn't change the fact that we would continue to live and do what we needed to do. And my job was to not only take care of her, but to make sure that dad was taken care of in the morning so that he would get up and be able to go to work and provide for the family so we wouldn't lose anything in that regard. So in that lesson, what mom taught me was this. She said that my character will always be defined by my choices, not the circumstances. We were poor by circumstance, not by choice. She had cancer by circumstance, not by choice. So in these teachings and these wonderful ways in which she had, that is probably very fundamental to me in knowing that everything that I choose to do or I choose to say will be a reflection of who I am. And that someday someone will judge me based on the things that I say and the things that I do, whether they see them or not, whether I think other people will see them. And the true testament of being a leader is, will you do those things when no one's watching or not? I know it's been said before, but will you actually follow through and do it? Or will you think that you can get away with it? And all of that will make a big difference, somewhere down the line. Now, the good news is Mom lived 43 years beyond that awful summer, but she still had her shares of ups and downs. During the last years of her life, she had dementia and Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's stole Mom from us, stole her memories from us. So I took an opportunity with all the leadership that she taught me to pay tribute to it. And I wrote that book called FANNY RULES, A Mother's Leadership Lessons That Never Grow Old. I have taken 9 rules that Mom gave me in leadership and relationships with people, and I wrapped around it 31 teachable moments, 31 memories. And so what Alzheimer's took away, I'm giving back to a whole new generation of people that can use this wisdom from the backyard to the boardroom. My proceeds of the book benefit the Alzheimer's Association. And I really am just so excited about the fact that I can allow these lessons to live on, because what I found is that there are a lot of individuals who need a little Fanny of their own.
I love that. She sounds like an incredible woman, and she lives on in your message and your spirit in this book that is just helping so many people around the world, and is going to continue to do so. So I commend you for that. Everyone, links in the description to go grab a copy of FANNY RULES, A Mother's Leadership Lessons That Never Grow Old. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it on Dr. Troy Hall's website, as well as his book that we discussed for the majority of this conversation, which is Cohesion Culture. And Dr. Troy Hall, my final question for you, because I want to respect your time.
Sure.
If you had to leave behind one lesson for those that come after you, what would that lesson be, at least at this point in your life now?
Well, it really goes back to the fact that I believe I've written 7 attributes of effective leaders that are incorporated in both of the books, really focus on it. And really, for me, it's about being teachable. If you are teachable, your mindset is ready and to be open. It's very important for us today to have a teachable mind. Why? Because it makes a difference between us being cultural superior and having cultural relativity. And we need that today in this voice of this growing need to really make sure that diversity, equity, and inclusion is there. I said this earlier in some of my work and mantras, and talked about is that you don't have to know everything. You just need to be teachable. And so I would leave that lesson, because what that does is, when I work with organizations and companies in regards to this cultural superior and relativity, it's one of the reasons that we have marginalized and oppressed individuals. And one of the reasons why this conversation has become so loud today is because we kind of aren't listening to people. And you know what happens in an argument when you don't listen to people? They get louder, thinking that you're going to get heard. I want to be a voice that says, you don't have to yell for me to get it. I do want to get it. And I want to practice that because I'm teachable. I want to learn as much as I possibly can so that I can understand. Because when I have understanding, then I can move toward peace, which is another one of those 7 attributes of an effective leader. I need to make sure that I move people to a space that neither team operated in. That's where peace will exist. And so with that being said, I'll give you just one more closing example as to how this works. And I don't want to say this because I want you to say, well, gee, aren't I wonderful and special, and am I perfect in doing it? No, I've made my share of mistakes, but you don't celebrate your mistakes. You celebrate the wins. So I was teaching at De La Salle University in Manila, and I was doing a leadership program. And so in this course, in this one class I had, I asked the Asian students, I said, raise your hand if you think you're a leader. Now, this is a program I've done in many other areas of the world, and most of the time, especially here in the Western portion of the world, we call it Western portion. I'm not really sure how all that works, but
yeah,
call it the Western. It's a matter, I guess, of your perspective.
sure.
And in there, people would raise their hands all the time. There'd be a good number of them, but nobody raised their hand. There was not one Asian student that raised their hand. Now I had to mentally process this, and I had to think of like, well, what was going on? So you could have taken the approach to belittle them, to say, well, you're all leaders. You said this in the beginning of the session. We're all leaders. I subscribe to the fact that everyone's a leader. And I could have made them wrong for not raising their hands. But instead, I chose to do something that I teach in my programs, and that is ask a open, non-leading question. And my question was, why didn't you raise your hand? And what I learned is that they did not claim to be a leader because it was a title of distinction and honor that they had to deserve. They had to earn it. And at this stage of their life, they weren't a leader in their mind because they hadn't earned it. Were they still exemplifying leadership? Absolutely. Were they still doing leadership decisions? Yes. They just didn't claim the title. If I had used cultural superiority, I would have made them wrong for not raising their hands, and would have tried to change them to be like my perception of leadership, that everyone should raise their hand because they are leaders and claim that title and move on. But instead, I used cultural relativity by understanding why they didn't. And that is the real lesson that I would like to leave, is that we will stop viewing things from being so freaking superior in how we view life, and be more understanding and understand the context of where people come from. I mean, when I was in Japan and I learned about Shinto principles versus Buddhism, I learned that principles are just practices that you put in place. It's not a religion. But if you think about it, the practices may have religious tendencies. All of a sudden, you could get confused by that. So it's really important that we do understand and allow people to express where they come from. And in this learning lesson, it's important to know that because I understand where you come from doesn't mean I agree with your thinking. It just means I understand where you come from. And if I want to influence your thinking, then I have to do so in a way in which I create values with you that will make a difference. I have to create a relationship with you that all of a sudden my voice of influence makes a difference in the things that I say, because I've respected you. Now you have an opportunity to respect me. Once again, transformative. I respect them first, or others first, and then allow them to respect me. I don't go into a situation with all of my background and experiences and expect people to respect me. I earn that respect each and every day. And if we really practice that, if everyone was doing that from that reciprocity that you talked about before, imagine what this world would be like. It would be so different. So thank you for this opportunity to leave that message with those who are watching it live, and for those who will listen to it later on.
I'm so happy I asked you that question. Well said, wise words, and thank you for that lesson. Seek first to, you said it much better than this line, but seek first to understand, not just to be understood, right? And everything you've done in the past doesn't matter. I love how you just said you earn that respect every single time. Like, it doesn't go away. That's a constant. So thank you very much for sharing that, Dr. Troy. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. I know I mentioned I'd talk to you after, but I know you have a hard stop, so I want to respect you. I'll reach out to you afterwards, but thank you so much for joining us today, and I look forward to next time.
Great. Thank you.
What an enlightening conversation with Dr. Troy Hall. Again, the links to grab either copy of his books, both Cohesion Culture and FANNY Rules, A Mother's Leadership Lessons That Never Grow Old, are going to be in the description. Jacob Craig on LinkedIn already got his copy. And remember, all the proceeds from FANNY Rules go to the Alzheimer's Association. So just a beautiful cause, a beautiful reason. What a philosophical conversation. We talked about leadership, we talked about culture, but we more so even talked about the principles of living an incredible life, and beliefs and mindsets and attitudes that we can hold in order to make the most of that life. So I'm just grateful personally to have had this conversation with Dr. Troy. So happy he could come on the show. We talked about, as Jacob Craig wrote here, grace. And we talked about just being a human being and doing good by other people. So thank you for watching. And by the way, you always ask the best way for you to help support this show so we can keep getting these incredible experts and guests on the show is, if you found value from this episode, simply share this episode with one friend who can use it. Hit the share button at the bottom. It doesn't cost you anything. And this episode will get to one person who might hear one nugget of information that can truly change the game for them, or even just give them something different to think about. So share this show. Thank you so much for watching and being a part of this experience, as always. And until we talk again next time, continue to be better.